So the topic of today's film is less light-hearted, to
Yeah,
put it lightly. Um,
mildly.
so this is going to be a very special episode. Are you familiar with the concept of a very special episode?
Do you want me to play dumb or do you want me to be honest and say you explained it to me yesterday?
What in your understanding is it then?
It's when a series decides to prioritize a specific topic, usually a heavy topic. So it might not necessarily continue with the narrative of the series, but prioritize discussing this particular topic.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with examples. There's a barrier, there's a filter that seems to exist between Britain and Malta where certain things transcend and certain things don't. So I'm guessing
Yeah,
you don't know
yeah.
what Grange Hill is.
I don't.
Arthur? Do you ever get Arthur?
I know about Arthur, but no, he wasn't in my. I didn't grow up with Arthur. No.
So Arthur was famous for doing very special episodes. You know, that sometimes a
Hmm.
student would come to school and he'd have a disability, and all the kids in Arthur would learn about that disability for a bit.
Visibility.
And
Yeah.
the teacher got gay married recently.
Okay.
You
Gay
look.
married. Is that what they call it? They got gay married.
It's just regular marriage, isn't it? But
Yes, yes.
um,
But no, that's cool. I mean, Sesame Street did that all the time. But is it a special
did
episode
they? I
if
don't
it
think I ever
happens all
saw
the
them.
time? Yeah, they discussed like. But I guess that was the whole point of Sesame Street. A lot of these like social conversations for kids.
Well, the Cookie
Um,
Monster learned about obesity or something.
I'm not sure how far the Cookie Monster went into disordered eating, but Elmo and all of that weren't they about like love and kindness and empathy? I think they
Elmo
were,
probably needs some lessons on consent, to be honest.
yeah, on boundaries, on maintaining
Though
boundaries.
he wants to be tickled, so it's okay.
Yeah, if he
Not
wants
everyone wants
to.
to be tickled
No.
all the time. Huh? What? Direct to DVD. Hello and
Mm,
welcome to Think Before Linklater, the podcast where we talk through Richard Linklater's filmography. Today we are talking about Tape from 2001. I read a little bit
mm,
about this before. I heard it was
okay.
all VHS camcorder
Hmm.
footage, and I kind of thought it was going to be like, what if Richard Linklater made Cloverfield? But it turned out to be
No.
very harrowing character study that gets into some topics about victim blaming, lines of consent, gaslighting,
Hmm.
in quite a mature and
Uh-huh.
moralistic fashion.
And of course, I mean, sexual misconduct. So where do we start? It's three characters.
Well, for a very
Basically, the
long time,
first,
it's two characters.
yeah, for the first half, it's just the two men. So there's Vince, who seems quite impulsive, tends to be aggressive or quite irritable character who is visiting from out of town because his friend John is winning some kind of film award for his movie.
I don't even think it's an
And
award. I think they're just screening his film as
oh,
part of a
yeah, oh
festival.
yes,
And
yeah,
you
part
first
of the
see
festival.
Vince, played by Ethan Hawke, and he's
Hmm.
drinking beer, but he's also
Hmm.
pouring beer away.
He wanted to let loose, so he did drink some, but I think he also wanted to give the impression that he is more drunk than he actually was. So if his motel room was littered with beer cans, John is going to think that he's way, way more drunk than he actually might be.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting kind of non-dialogue
Hmm.
way of showing what was to come because it sets up this mystery
Yeah.
of why is he doing this? And then as the
Hmm.
film progresses and it reveals more of the plot, you kind of understand that he's trying to lull John's character into a sense of false security almost and get
Hmm.
him to make this confession.
And I think from the get-go you realize that these two friends aren't necessarily friendly, that there's some kind of ulterior motive to their interaction. It's not just two high school friends reuniting after some years to celebrate someone's achievements, that there might be something else underlying that's going to pivot the dialogue and the interaction.
So
So
it's
that
a
happens
weird
with.
dynamic because Vince is almost like inviting John to demean him and belittle him and take this position of high status that he then can undercut. Like Vince has
Yeah.
very much engineered the entire situation according to a script, and then it ends up going very differently.
I mean, even in the beginning, we see Vince talking about how he's no longer with his partner because she thinks he's a bit too violent, and he has this conversation with John on how maybe his behavior is reckless and that he should grow up. Sort of always giving into the idea that Vince is kind of a fuck up or that he hasn't matured since high school ended, while John has changed, he's grown up, he knows his wrongdoings, and he did better, sort of. And that's the setup you're mentioning, right? Of wanting to play into the power imbalance and create a sort of hierarchy between them.
That's kind of the most Linklater element of it, and maybe one of the reasons why you picked, because it is based on a play, why you picked this
Hmm.
play to adapt into a film. Because Vince is a drug dealer and John is a filmmaker, seems
Hmm.
semi-professionally, like not entirely successful, but
Yeah,
could be if it goes well.
starting.
And it's like, well, why is what I'm doing any better than what you're doing? You're making films about crime and I'm dealing drugs. Neither of us are really going down the mines and working in a factory, are we?
Exactly, I had that, and it links to Linklater's discussed idea of like what happens after high school, the idleness that comes with that, and how some people manage to mature and some people are stuck in those post high school days. So those are themes we've seen Linklater do in other movies, right? So
Yeah.
yes, that could have very easily been one of the reasons why he decided to adapt and take on this screenplay and turned into a movie. But then there's also, I think, the element that it is intimate, which Linklater loves doing, rather than it being a big story driven by a lot of big events. It's intimate. It's all set in one dodgy motel room, right? It's just three characters, and the story is heavily based on those three characters and how they converse with one another. We're not distracted by other plots or characters doing other things. It's just three people meeting in one point and having a deep conversation on one particular event in their life.
Kind of say it's like if the camera didn't just kind of drift around aimlessly and it actually stayed with
In
the
one,
same characters for 90 minutes.
yeah.
And it happens in real time, which he's obsessed with as well. Always going on about
Hmm.
time. And yeah, Vince is stuck in the past, it seems very much so. While John wants to have moved on and seems like he's moved on in a lot of ways, but there's an event that Vince feels needs to be kind of dragged back up.
Yeah, and realistically, I think John also feels like he is better and more evolved than both himself when he was in high school, but also Vince. So do we get that sort of impression that John thinks he's above it all, that he's moved on. But then we see that Vince brings up back the past and John has to revisit it with him. So what
John's
event in the.
very judgy and like
He
Vince.
has this holier than thou approach to Vince and even himself.
Which is kind
Of
of justified in a way because Vince is a drug
Yeah, it's
dealer
problematic.
in
Yeah.
his boxes and drinking,
Hmm.
and John is staying in a fancy hotel. I don't really get the impression of what their relationship was beforehand because it seems like they were
Hmm.
pretty good friends. But do you think
Yeah.
John's kind of coming there to be like, I'm taking charity on you or I'm showing off? all my success while you've done nothing, or
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think, first of all, it's Vince, but he comes to Leipzig for the festival. John might have just been happy to see someone celebrating his achievement or just witnessing it. But I think the way he speaks to Vince, there is this kind of attitude where you should do this, or I have been doing better since I've done, which is kind of very condescending. And that might have not been the approach most people would have taken. I don't necessarily know how close they are at this point. They are somewhat in each other's lives just because they do know what's happening, with the relationships, the changes in their work, and all of that. But I don't think if I were in a position that someone came from out of town to see something I achieved, that I would take the approach of trying to tell them how to manage their life, or that I'm doing better just because I have one screening. You know what I mean? That's
yeah, but you're also not a sexual predator, so there are quite a few
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm
differences.
saying this is his personality, and we need to also take that into consideration that there might be animosity brewing underneath it all, and I can't say if he specifically wanted Vince to be there to feel better then. But once he is there, he does push the narrative of, yes, I do feel I'm doing better than you. And then we see Vince broach the subject of Amy,
Well,
right?
he kind of lulls him into a sense of false security first by offering him a joint, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
think he actually cracks open the beer, but he does offer him a beer, and so he's
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting him relaxed, bringing his
Yep.
guard down, and then he brings up this
Mm-hmm.
topic of this girl that Vince used to go out with. And then she broke up with him, and
And had a fling.
with John. He
And
keeps
of course,
prompting him and probing him and breaking him down. Yeah, he's
yeah, because it starts off with Vince asking about the night that he and Amy spent together. And at first, John is like, it was violent, it was rough. And eventually, yes, he's lulled and I would say also pushed to admit that it might have been rape.
like he starts by saying she was saying no, and then he was very insistent and persuasive
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
kind of coerced her
coerce,
into
you
it.
know. Mm-hmm.
And then eventually he does kind of say that it was full on kind of he was holding her back and sexually
Yeah.
assaulting her. And that's all captured
And
on tape.
yeah, because what we don't know is that Vince was recording the conversation while John was admitting to all of this. But then Vince is very honest about it and shows John, like, listen, I was recording you, this is the tape. That was also an interesting thing to do. Why tell him there is a tape after all?
Yeah, it immediately creates this dynamic where John wants to leave, but he can't leave
Can't.
now because Vince has got this incriminating
There's
tape
evidence.
against
Yeah.
him. And so there's suddenly this whole kind of element. And then Vince calls up the girl, now the woman in question, and asks her to come over. Vince never says that he's actually going to show her the tape, but just the fact that he has it is enough to kind of freak John out. And I
Yeah,
guess eventually, if he did become a successful filmmaker, then Vince would have this
that would.
blackmail against him as well. So,
Mm-hmm. I know it's true. But you also, this for me shows a lot the motivation for Vince. I believe Vince was very clear from the get-go that this wasn't something he was doing because he has this moral compass that he needs to do the right thing. I think for him it was one way of one-upping Joe. And the fact that he taped it and rather than kept the tape for himself and then handed it to the police or handed it to Amy, he used it as a tool to blackmail or threaten somehow Joe, John,
Yeah, stop
sorry.
saying Joe.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
So
thought
yeah.
that was one of the most interesting parts of the film for me was you're never quite sure about the motivation behind any of it or what the characters, how the characters are even justifying it to themselves. Because is Vince doing this out of some kind of moral
Mm-hmm.
duty? Is he doing it just to get back at his friend who stole his girl? Is who he
Mm-hmm.
thinks he stole his girl, even though they'd broken up at the time? Is he
But
mad at
then we
Amy
get more answers later.
because Amy
Left
didn't have
him.
sex with him, but then did have sex
Yeah.
with John?
But I think for me, the motivation, Vince, I think, is the easiest motivation to understand in the sense that as the movie goes on, we get to see more layers to it. And it always points to the same thing that he felt incredibly hurt that he loved this girl and she broke up with him and they never had sex during this relationship. And then she goes on to have a very casual thing with his best friend and she does end up having sex. Now, the debate is whether it was consensual sex or not. But for him, it was a betrayal both from her end but also from his friend's end, and he hung on to that pain. That was the motivation of wanting these two people to come, meet, and discuss it all together. I don't think it was anything to do with morals when it comes to Vince. When shit hits the fan and police are coming, he's the one to run away. There's no morality in his thinking, it's just survival.
I think he is ultimately self-centered, but the debate would be whether in his head he thinks he's getting some
Oh
kind
no,
of
no.
justice.
I think in his head he understands it as both. I think he thinks he's doing it for Amy, but he also understands he's doing it for himself as well.
We should say as well, Robert, Sean Leonard, Ethan Hawke, incredible acting throughout this film.
Yes, no, incredible performances. You believe them throughout. I loved those two characters together. I mean, after that Poet Society, we see a reunion, but also
Can't
like
watch
Uma.
films about teachers because they're too
Oh no,
unrealistic
you
for me.
don't tell me no. It's beautiful, Joe. You need to see it. Even just the scenery is magnificent. But also like Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke were married at the time, and you see the chemistry and intimacy. Anyway, so great performances. I think Ethan Hawke specifically shines a lot in this role. But I mean, the reality is, as we were saying, there isn't a lot to hide behind in this movie. It's a very small set. Characters can't hide. It's them and the camera, not much more. And they need to be vulnerable because of the subject matter, but also of the intimacy created. So brilliant performances, I would say, in not great settings. And in fact, like I think we should discuss the introduction of Amy to the plot, right? So Vince calls her up, and she unknowingly is stepping into a trap.
Yeah, I don't think he sees it as a trap, but
No,
it's a
no, and that's where
situation he's engineered.
But let's say you have an understanding that your ex-girlfriend and your best friend, there might have been a sexual assault. Would you ever consider to bring this girl over when it's just you and him in this dodgy motel room? Like, do you even consider her safety or how scared she might feel? If you are sure that your friend raped her, how would you even think of bringing her into this private room where it's just you, him, and her,
I
and
mean, yeah,
not warning her that John will be here, that we're having this kind of conversation.
well, he doesn't warn her because she wouldn't have come if it told her.
Come, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. That Vince is purely motivated by his own needs. He doesn't care about her because ultimately he's using her to play this power dynamic game he's playing with John. He doesn't care about her well-being because the first thing all of us clearly see is her being shocked and being uncomfortable.
That's incredibly awkward in that scene because when she
Mm-hmm.
first comes in, they're not really acknowledging anything that's happened. So they're just
Yeah.
making small talk, like,
Small talk about
oh, what
life
what are
and
you doing now? But there's
what
this
jobs.
whole dynamic and staging where John's kind of like hovering by the door and half in,
Ready to
half
leave.
out, and
Mm-hmm.
she's kind of quite confused. She doesn't really know what's going on at all. That I couldn't watch. I was covering my eyes in that section.
I mean, realistically speaking, it would be awkward even if there was no rape. Two best friends that you were in the middle of a love triangle, and like now years have gone by, but clearly there is still some kind of tension, and you're here in this. It's funny. It's a funny interaction to be put in, but then you add the rape, and it becomes scary as well. It's not just uncomfortable. There is immediate concern to your safety, but also the worry of the past trauma and how it affects her thinking about the past. And then eventually they do broach the subject of what happened on that particular night. And I think this is where we're a bit shocked in the sense of Amy doesn't automatically go with the narrative.
They're both drunk. It was regrettable and a mistake for both of them, but whether it
Mm-hmm.
actually crossed that line into full-on sexual assault, like she says it wasn't, but that might be how she's kind
Mm-hmm.
of justifying it to herself, and she doesn't want to be a
Mm-hmm.
victim and she doesn't see herself as a
Yeah.
victim. He's almost like trying to make her admit that he raped her in a way. It's
Yeah, and very intense. And that is where I get confused with the motivations of why does he need her to admit that it was rape when it would be much easier to just go along with her denial of it and then he's scot-free, right?
it seems like, or he says at least, that it was a major changing point in his life and something that was very
Mm-hmm.
defining and life-changing for him and made him
Mm-hmm.
view sex and consent differently.
Yeah,
And
and even
for
how if he's going to be a good person or not, and
and for
and
her,
how your
she's
actions.
like, it was
Mhm.
just something that happened.
But there is also the idea that most sexual assault is about power. And by her going, no, it was just sex, then she's not playing into that power dynamic and she's not giving him the power that he needed. So there is also a part of me that's like, does he want her to admit that it was sexual assault? So that he feels that he suppressed her power, assaulted her, and she's still the victim and abuser. The victim and abuser is still at play, because if she denies it, then he didn't have that effect on her.
Yeah, he wants to be a bigger character, a bigger part of her life,
Mm-hmm.
whilst she
Um,
she doesn't want to give him that kind of power over her. She doesn't want to be
which again
defined
is what
by trauma and by being a victim.
yeah, and what I'm saying is that a perpetrator wants to have that power. So by him insisting that it was sexual assault, we might actually be seeing him playing into the role of a perpetrator.
Do you not believe him? Because he's very adamant that he's changed now as a person, and this is something that he massively regrets and would take back if he could.
Mm.
He's trying to apologize
So you're asking me if I believe if it was assault or not, or if he has changed or not.
if he's changed or not.
I think, and this happens a lot with people, that he has changed his behavior but has not changed his thoughts. I'm assuming that he has stopped raping women, but I think there is a part of him that still seeks power difference, and he will get it in other ways because he agrees that rape is bad and is avoiding it. But we see him do it with John and with Amy. Oh, sorry, with Vince and with Amy, that he needs to feel like the bigger person, the more powerful person in the room. Honestly, if that were to turn into a full long-term relationship, we would still see a power imbalance and a dysfunctional relationship, but it might not involve sexual assault. It might involve emotional or psychological abuse or economic abuse, any of those things. That's how I interpret John. but I know that part of the story is also how your own perspective interprets all of these understandings of the same story. Because all three characters have a different understanding of it and have a different explanation as to why things happen and how to deal with it. So I'm guessing the audience has as many understandings. But then we see Amy denying it, and then you go into why is she denying it? Was it genuinely a case where there wasn't sexual assault and she might like rough sex and for her that was consensual? Or was it one way of her rationalizing a really horrible experience so that it doesn't define her, doesn't make her a victim? Remember, we also live in a society where a lot of rape victims are not believed, meaning that a lot of rape victims do not even believe themselves because that shit is internalized. And unfortunately, I've heard many, many women speak on the fact that no, but I contributed to it because I was drinking. No, I was part of it because I told him to go back to my room. And so they'll find 1,000 reasons to justify what happened and not call it for what it is. And most of them do it to survive, to not make the trauma traumatic. So that might also be the case for Amy. But then as the conversation goes on, she does go into the fact of why are you apologizing now? Is it because there's a tape and you're scared of that? So you wonder whether she is also doing it because it's not a safe space to have this conversation, that it is much safer for her to say, no, it wasn't rape, because she is in a room with two men that are not safe for her. So it could also be a survival tactic to get out of the room safely. Very hard to say to your perpetrator that he raped you when you're just you, him, and a drunk man in one motel room.
So the event happened 10 years ago, and you're getting three different people's perspective on it, all of whom have lived very different lives from that point, some of whom were drunk at the time. So there are all sorts
Mm-hmm.
of factors there that contribute to what's going on. From the sounds of it, even from mine and your view of what happened, of just watching the 90-minute conversation, there are very different interpretations. So I think that's a key idea.
I think a key idea of the film is that there is one event, but people interpret it completely differently based on their own perspective, their own life, and probably how they interpreted things at the time is very different from how they interpreted them much later.
Yeah, like
And
I
in
saw
fact,
Amy's when she's denying the fact that it was rape. I saw that as her kind of not giving these two men power over her,
yeah.
saying it was a mistake, sure, it shouldn't have happened,
Mhm.
but I'm not gonna give you whatever it is you want. Like Vince clearly wants something here. John
Mhm.
wants absolution. He wants to
Mhm.
apologize. And she's
Yeah.
like, no, it's not that easy. You don't just get to slap a plaster on this
Apology.
and be done with it. Like, it's
Mhm.
something that I had to live with. It's something you have to live with. None of us are
Yeah.
getting closure out of this interaction.
It's definitely, I think there is truth to that. I just have also, I understand that there might be other explanations or that it's hardly ever going to be just one justification of why she behaved the way she did. Realistically speaking, it's an incredibly scary situation. And it's not safe for her to engage in a discussion of, yes, this was rape, yes, you hurt me, yes, you're a piece of shit, all of that. Likelihood is that it would escalate and you don't know where that would go.
That's very interesting because I guess I knew that logically, but I wouldn't really have seen it that way until you pointed it out.
So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that there might be spaces in her life where she does sit down and admit that it was rape. But it might that specific motel room might not be it, just for safety concerns. But it could also be that I'm not going to play into this power dynamic where I'm again here and you're again here and you have narratives that you want to push towards and I'm not going to play into them. But it could also be her own personal understanding that I will not call it rape because that would make whatever scary situation I went through much more traumatizing. But she could also have been playing into lulling him into saying more. It could have been a
Yeah.
manipulation tactic from her end to get him to admit more. There are many times she said, explain to me what happened. Remind me, how do you... So she keeps asking him, rather if it was a conversation of, no, it was rape, it would have ended there without him having to explain what is rape, what happened, you know what I mean? So she might have also done that to gauge how self-aware he was in his actions at the time or now, years later.
He keeps kind of
Uh-huh.
saying like, yeah, you know what I'm apologizing for, you know.
Uh-huh.
And she's
Exactly.
like,
And
yeah, tell me what you're
yeah,
apologizing for.
yeah. I've had this conversation with many people at this point in my life. A lot of victims walk away not even knowing if the perpetrator knows what they did. Because sometimes there is this idea that it's almost the perpetrator's right to have sex. So there's always the question of, am I 100% sure that it was non-consensual? And if I'm not sure, then how is he going to be sure? Or how are they going to be sure? So that could feed into that questioning of like, let me ask him to gauge how much he's actually aware of what he did to me. Or if he says it is, then all the questioning in my own head might be resolved by his answers. Maybe I need my perpetrator to confirm it was sexual assault for me to admit that it was sexual assault.
Yeah, it's not clear cut scenario,
No.
is it? At all.
No, and at all. And I think the dialogue is very well written so that we are able to have these conversations often. It deals with it just enough to show that it's layered and it's complex and every character is defined by how they experience this particular event. But then it allows for us to continue the discussion, to not have everything drawn out and explained. It also doesn't trivialize rape. It doesn't sensationalize it. It's very grounded to what was real to them rather than keeping it abstract. Although very heavy, I think it was handled really well.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know what, the one thing we're not talking about is Richard Linklater's involvement in this at all because he didn't write it.
But then I will address his choices later. But I think in the moment, yes, I need to acknowledge the dialogue, and the dialogue wasn't him. It was the playwright.
But also, Vince must have found out somehow that this happened. Someone must have told him. I don't think John told him, and I don't think
That
Amy told him. So how would Vince have known
told him what? Sorry.
that there was some kind of sexual assault that occurred?
Yeah, I forgot if it was it mentioned in the movie of how he found out. I think Amy must have told him something, but I might be misremembering. But I think Amy didn't say sexual assault ever. I think that might have been something that Vince extrapolated or guessed at based on his experience of Amy and of John. And so who knows how Vince came to find out and also suspected it.
And then the final
The
part of the
final.
film is that she makes
A
a phone
call.
call because it's established. We don't even know if this is true, to be fair, but she says she works for the district attorney. So she calls up
She's
the
the assistant to the district attorney. You know what a powerful position that she has. And that is part of it too. Like if Vince and John were having a conversation before she walked in of what happened after high school and who matured more than who, she out outplays all of them, okay? She's the assistant to the district attorney. The district attorney is one of the most powerful people in a state, and she's the assistant to him. So talk about maturity, talk about a powerful role. And again, we don't know if that is true or not, but that's a hard thing to fake.
I don't know. You're
That
the one
is,
who's saying that she's feeling the power dynamic, so that could be her way of kind of trying to
yes. But first of all, she
elevate
says all
herself.
of that before we even broach the subject of the sexual assault. And again, that is a hard position to fake because those are basically government official positions. So it's a very quick lie to catch. That's
I
what
don't
I'm
know.
saying.
I think we should not trust women. Are we recording this? Sorry, no, we'll always trust women. Sorry, I said I wouldn't
Okay.
make any jokes.
No, but I mean, realistically, then she goes on to lie by pretending to call the police, where she says that she's in a motel room and one person there's an amount of drugs, illegal drugs, and one person also has a history of sexual misconduct. And of course, everyone then panics. Vince decides to flush the stash of weed, coke, and I don't know what else he had. John decides to stay and face the consequences of his actions, which again, you wonder why he's doing it. Maybe he is a better person.
That is
But
a really badass moment though when she stands up and makes that phone
yeah.
call and she's like, I bet you're wondering if the statute of limitations has passed, but there is no
Mm-hmm.
statute of limitations on sexual assault. And then she makes this phone call and the two guys who have kind of been like fighting with each other
Trying.
throughout the first half of the film and trying to get one up on each other, suddenly both of them are in panic mode and they're like
Mm-hmm.
just freaked out.
Yeah, very interesting. But then they come to find out that it wasn't a real call. After all the panic and the knee-jerk emotional reactions, they realize it wasn't real. And everyone it all ends on a very cordial note at the end. You know what I mean? Like nothing really happens. No one's like yelling at anyone or being called. It's like, okay, this happened. Bye.
Vince is
But I
just
think,
completely deflated because he wanted this to be this massive moment
yeah,
of everyone blowing up at each other, and it ends with him just flushing a load of weed down a toilet and then realizing that he did it all for nothing. And then Amy's just
yeah.
like, bye.
And it's one way of her gaining power. Oh, it's like, see, you wanted me to come into this room and be puppet to your game. But look who's the puppet now.
He's just reduced to like just sitting
He's
on the floor
literally,
by the
yeah,
toilet,
like
like
looking
going, but my
astounded.
drugs, my drugs.
And
And she's
then
like,
as she's closing the door, it's like, but it was nice seeing you. You still wanted something from her, but you didn't get it. But then that is when I question whether John was actually remorseful or not, because he didn't budge. He didn't get scared. He didn't want to run away. He actually waited for the police to come. And you wonder, like, did he catch on to the fact that she was lying? Was he so convinced that as a privileged white male, nothing would happen? So why even bother moving? I think there's also the fact that the tape, there's not enough evidence because confessions are rarely used as enough evidence. There needs to be other things to find someone guilty because confessions can be coerced, and in fact that is the conversation pretty much between John and Vince of like, did he actually admit to it or was he coerced into admitting it was rape? And a jury would find that hard to put someone behind bars if there was a suspicion that he was coerced into admitting that it was rape.
I think there is
There's a
certain laws
reason.
about recording people without their knowledge
Yeah,
as well, aren't
exactly,
there? As
exactly.
well.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there is a reason why people are taken to have confessions or interviewed in rooms where they know what their rights are, that they are being recorded, that they're usually to police officers, not just one. So all of these things are there to protect the person who is doing the talking, so that if they are found guilty, it's with all the right setup. So the tape wasn't going to be enough to convict him. It was still going to be he said, she said kind of case. And if he found a good lawyer, he would have easily gotten out of that mess. But it's still to go through a trial where the public would know that you are suspected for sexual misconduct is still something most people wouldn't want to deal with. So
Yeah, it would be probably career ruining as a
yeah,
filmmaker, or not, considering the amount of Me
yeah,
Too
it depends.
allegations that
Yeah.
have come to light.
It might stall his career progress for a while. Career ruining, I think, is a bit of a stretch, but it's definitely going to impact him. And I mean, let's be frank also. No one would admit to assaulting someone if they don't genuinely believe they. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to ask you. Do you think there is a chance that he would have said, yes, I raped her, if in his heart there was doubt of whether it was rape or not?
No, I think he thinks he did.
It's a hard pill to swallow, so to admit it again, because he is of sound mind, quite intellectual person, I don't see how he could have said that he did something when he himself wouldn't have believed had he did.
And maybe it's
Yeah.
just because I really like Robert Sean Leonard and he was great on House. But I do believe that he's genuinely remorseful and willing to face consequences at the end. If for nothing else, just for his own kind of peace of mind, because it's
Mm,
something that he's been affected by and
yeah.
feels really bad about.
And to be fair, let's be honest, I'm not excusing anything, okay? But if this was a one-time incident that happened when he was, 17, 18, and drunk, and then he felt remorseful, it shouldn't define the person. And I'm not saying this to excuse any of it, but I'm just saying that people can understand that they made mistakes and grow and be better. That is the hope, right? So maybe I'm being cynical, and maybe he realized, and this was that pivotal incident in his life where he realized he really fucked up. And this was the time to actually step up and say, yes, I did it. Let the consequences come to me. I don't know. I can't forgive because it wasn't me. Amy needs to forgive him. And I will add, Amy needs to forgive him, not for him, but for her. Anyway.
So I think we're both agreeing it's a very nuanced, very well written
Mm-hmm.
film. Now we gotta talk about why Richard Linklater is directing this.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not a
I
very
think
visual film. It's very
no.
clearly a stage play. It's all one set. It's all people
Yeah, but I
entering
think
and leaving
here,
one room.
but I think here we do see how his choices actually benefited the story. The handheld camcorders, the low lighting, and even how scenes were cut made you feel like you were part of the scene. It almost made you feel like I was holding the camera. It definitely, for me, it added to the intimacy, and therefore it allowed for me to be really part of the conversation.
Would you say
So
naturalistic?
I don't know if it's naturalistic or more like if naturalistic means kind of candid, spontaneous, then yes,
It's
I guess.
almost like you're a fourth person in the room.
Uh-huh. And I honestly, in the first, I think, 15 minutes, I did feel like, oh, I've almost claustrophobic because it is one room. It felt grimy and yucky. The people were grimy and yucky, and the very low light. Like, I need to see a tree, I need to see a sun, something. It felt
You just love
claustrophobic.
trees though, to be fair.
Yeah, I love trees. Yeah, you can make all the fun about it, but I'm very happy with admitting I love trees. Yeah. So in the first 15 minutes, it felt a bit claustrophobic. Like I need them to stretch, I need them to move, I need them to do. And also the first 15 minutes was Vince drinking, and the conflict between the two characters. But then the more they converse, everything else sort of I was part of the room. No longer felt claustrophobic because I was pulled into the conversation. And that made it very realistic. Although I've never been in a motel room, because that's not a thing in Malta. I could easily see myself being part of this kind of conversation in this one space where it's just two people discussing one thing. Then suddenly it's no longer claustrophobic, it's just realistic.
Very engaging and real. And Ethan Hawke, Vince, is very frenetic. He's kind of moving back and forth into the bathroom and lying down on the bed. And the Robert Sean Leonard, John, is kind of sat quite still, low down, and calm and focused. The only camera thing I thought was frankly ridiculous was after Vince does a line of coke and the camera kind of wobbles a little bit and like zooms in and out of his face. It was so stupid. This is a really serious movie and I'm really engaged and I care about the characters and the plot, but that is just a terrible choice, Richard Linklater. What are you doing? But
Fair. I think I didn't notice it as much as you did, but no, now that you mentioned it, yes, it was a stupid choice. It's a silly choice. Also, can I say, again, I don't know, but for someone who was drinking that much and then doing coke, he was still very rational. He was more jumpy, but there were many times where he just sat and listened in silence, or he was actually engaged and having the right question or the right comment. So he was quite self-possessed for someone who basically for that 2 hours was actually ingesting a lot of drugs.
yeah, I mean, it depends on personal tolerance. If he's a dealer, he's
I was
probably
going to say, fair enough.
quite a high
Fair
tolerance.
enough.
And it's like a couple of lines and 4 beers it's not gonna get you like sloppy drunk.
No, but I mean, 2 lines of coke would get me dancing all night. So the fact that he was able to just sit on a chair.
I think it depends what kind of vibe you're in. If there was music playing, it'd probably be raving. But because he's in quite a tense situation, I think he's just ultra focused and alert.
Fair. To be honest, I shouldn't comment. I wouldn't know how that fair. I get drunk with half a glass of anything, so I'm not one to comment on tolerance. It just for me was I was impressed by he's actually quite self-possessed for the amount of stuff he took. That shows maybe how naive I am. Yeah, and also how John didn't take anything.
He has a couple of puffs of the joint, I think.
Yeah. I think it shows how much he needs to be in control, though. However, later we come to find out that it's Vince that is the character that needs to control the narrative. And then it all makes sense. Because Amy says something of like, he always wanted to go through this and this and this. And then if you don't fit into that, in those choices, then he gets annoyed. Like, oh, that's why this is what happened before Amy came along. He was creating a situation.
Yeah, his whole thing is he's jealous and she didn't have sex with him and he feels like he was owed it and then he had sex with her.
But it's not just jealousy, it's also feels insecure.
Yeah,
somehow he's less
jealousy, insecurity, it all comes from the same place, doesn't it? And the idea that his friends now made a film that's successful and he's still just a drug dealer and a volunteer firefighter, I think he says. Is that a real thing?
I think it is because I did look it up. But again, what kind of voluntary firefighting can you do if your main job is drug dealing and drug taking? So it might just be something he says, but rarely does. So
is a volunteer firefighter like a vigilante firefighter?
No, it would you'd still
they have
go
like
with
a
the
Ghostbusters car, but with a fire truck version, and they drive around looking for fires and putting them out.
No, they're still part of the firefighting department. It's just that they go there on a voluntary basis rather than being on the payroll.
Is it like being in reserve for the army, where if there's a really big fire, then they'll call in the volunteer firefighters?
I don't know if it's that or if they're actually on a schedule. So you just show up a couple of times a week or a month, no matter if there is a fire or not. I don't know, Joe.
Okay, I don't know why I'm asking you. But you get
Yeah,
the impression that's kind of just a cover story because he deals some weed to the fire chief.
yeah. It's also one way to justify his existence. So rather than telling people, "Oh, I haven't, I don't do anything, I just sell drugs,"
It's
he
not a
has a
great one
story of
though, because if you say
yeah,
I'm a volunteer firefighter, people are immediately going to be like, volunteer, what do you do for money?
yeah. It's true. It's not a great cover story, but I mean, it's better than just saying nothing. It makes you feel like a hero. And like if I'm doing it for free, then I'm really altruistic. So let's see what other point. There was no music, no soundtrack to this film.
Apart from right at the end,
Oh yeah, yeah, at the end.
over the
But
credits.
I think that helps so that every emotional reaction was basically the characters and the dialogue. You know, sometimes music is put on to make you feel a particular way. In this case, you didn't need it.
No, yeah, it adds to the reality and it makes it more naturalistic, I might even say.
Mm-hmm. You know what we were discussing earlier, the fact that, you know, how everyone is interpreting the situation based on their life experience. And of course, how they interpreted it at the time is different than how they interpreted it much later when they're grown. And then it becomes also a discussion for me about what is real and therefore, like, who is more likely to be telling the truth or for it to be perceived as the truth. In the situation, how they view it now is way more important than how they viewed it at the time.
Like something that can be life changing for one person can be just another Tuesday for somebody else.
But also, like, let's say Amy was traumatized at the time, but now she's at a position where she denies it because nothing happened all of these years. Is it because now she denies it that she's able to process and juggle all of it? Or has maybe her denial become more true than the trauma?
I
Or
did
the opposite for John. At the time, he wasn't admitting that it was assault, but now he is remorseful and he wants to step up. So is that more true than how it initially happened and how he initially perceived it? Is that more real and more powerful than when it happened? Because I'm sure if police were involved at the time of it happening, it would have had different consequences to if they were involved now.
the
So,
objective and subjective nature of truth and
mhm.
emotional
And
consequence.
and also like the social context of it all, of whose voices are usually believed and whose voices are usually seen to be truer than others. So,
Yeah, because that's an element to it as well. I think they mention when initially he's admitting to it, Vince is saying you would have called her a prude if she hadn't put out for you. So
mm,
there might have been an element that she kind of went along with it because of the social pressure at the time, even though she didn't
mhm.
really want to, which further blurs the lines.
Yes, but even now, if they speak up, who's going to be believed? Whose version is going to weigh more than everyone else's,
Yeah,
right?
it's one person's word against another, isn't it? And one of them is
Yeah.
a man.
You know, I studied feminist epistemologies, and it was basically all about how it's always the male perspective that is just the norm in society. That is institutionalized. It's not a decision people make consciously. That is also part of the subtext of it all. So, ready to rate?
Yeah, we can rate.
You go first. You always make me go first.
I didn't always make you go first.
Not superlatives. Not superlatives are not helpful.
Obviously, thinker.
Definitely.
I don't think it links to the next film because the next film is School of Rock, which has nothing in common. Maybe Richard Linklater saw Dead Poets Society after this because Ethan Hawke and Robert Sean Leonard, and then thought,
Kept
I'll do,
mentioning
I'll do a film about schools next.
very different kind
So
of
not a
schools, but okay.
linker, definitely not a stinker because I think this is one of the only ones in the last few where I've not been watching the clock the whole time, waiting for it to
Yeah.
finish. I was engaged
No.
and
It
into it.
dealt with a heavy subject matter in a mature, in-depth, nuanced way. Characters were developed brilliantly. Writing was incredible, and acting again was also very, very, very good. So I would agree, Tinker. It definitely engaged us a lot in conversation as well. There was very rarely us talking at a tangent. We were pretty much discussing the movie throughout. So yeah, there were a lot of things to discuss, and it made us think and made us.
Feel.
But it wasn't just. I felt like I critically engaged with the content matter. It wasn't just me receiving the narrative. It allowed me to expand on that and build more conversations around it.
Yeah, and even just talking about it and hearing our different things we took
Mm-hmm.
from it was interesting. Very, 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 very good movie. Not as interesting
Yes.
when the very good movies, is it? But
No, it is because I thought last time it was like I'm completely lost hope that I will ever enjoy these. But no, this was good. It was nice. I appreciate it. I will take it. Next one I know is brilliant as well. Not to foreshadow anything, but I mean I love School of Rock. So no, let's enjoy this, okay? I'm sure there will be plenty of stinkers along. So a
yeah,
win is a win.
and I think we do need a palate cleanser of a
Yeah.
light-hearted Jack Black comedy after this.
With
So,
plenty of soundtrack to boot.
well, that's
Okay.
it.